Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 19th February 2026. My name's Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal, but not for very long because I'm on my way to CCW Berlin, which I cannot wait for, Mark. It's almost like the contact center Super Bowl of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't feel like it's a year since the last one. So it's strange how quickly time has flown.
What's that old saying about getting older and time flying? And there's something to it. But no, it's definitely going to be a lot of fun. People coming in from around the world to Contact Center Week Berlin, CCW Berlin. Um, when you say it seems just like yesterday, I remember a year ago going to CCW Berlin, and when I got there, I will never forget, after my first full day on the ground, getting a text message from Lufthansa saying, there's a problem with your flight home. You need to rebook using our app, which didn't work. And they ended up having me, instead of fly out like 4 days later, I had to fly out the following day. It was one of the strangest business trips I've ever done.
Well, there's many things that could be worse than getting an extra day in Berlin anyway.
That's it. That's it. Anyway, Mark, who are we talking to today? What's this is one of your interviews. I'm curious about what we're going to be hearing about.
Yeah, I called up Michael Gray, who's chief of strategy at a company called Spacial Working, based in
Hmm.
London. I know Michael well. I used to do some work with him when he was at Sonsei previously. So Michael's had a lot of experience designing and working on work from home systems, so flexible working within the CX environment. And so I just called him up to ask about some of the research he's done, what he's been looking at, how have things changed, especially since the pandemic. Because
Hmm.
if you follow the media stories about a lot of this, the change since the pandemic, there's a sort of a drumbeat of return to the office stories. A lot of
Yep.
companies saying we need to get everybody back in the office, and I think that, what really comes out talking to Michael is that the reality is not binary. It's not 100% work from home or 100% return to the office. There's a need to sort of accept that things are just much more flexible these days. So the real question is, how are you going to manage a hybrid?
That's a good question, and I think Michael's in a very good position to talk about this. You're right. There has been a big drumbeat about people going back into the office, government workers especially. We hear quite a lot of that, more and more from the private sector too. But the fact is, research shows that hybrid working is still very much part of what's going on in CX delivery. So it's good that we're getting this perspective, and quite frankly, I think more of a well-rounded take on how hybrid can function in not just, I would say, an operationally sound fashion, but in a quality-driven fashion too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this point about hybrid almost being an expectation now, it's really important. It can be used as a way of attracting more people. People who just couldn't be in the office 5 days a week. But clearly there is a need to balance this. Where you have early career professionals, obviously it helps for them to be in the office and meeting and mixing people and learning on the job. But clearly once you have kids or other caring responsibilities, then the ability to take a couple of days at home each week definitely helps.
Yeah, it does. I agree with you. And I think if people earn their right to do so and they've proven themselves to be good performers and that they're able to work remotely or work in a hybrid environment, then my view has always been you've got to go with what works. And the environment, the labor force environment that we had 15, 20 years ago is not reflective of what we have today. And organizations need to think about that. So I'm going to propose that we head on over to the chat with our friend Michael Gray and find out a little bit more about what's going on in this very, very exciting domain of CX.
All right, so why don't we kick off by saying I think that both of us are going to come into this conversation pretty much supporting flexible working. So it's not as if we're designing this as an argument. I mean, I've worked from home for years. I'm sure that you have as well. But if you were going back in time and looking at when we first started allowing professional jobs to be managed from home, which companies were doing it first? And was it only certain types of job or certain industries that started off doing this?
I think probably the best way to answer that is to actually not just look at the recent past, to be honest, because I think it's important to acknowledge that home working's been going around for a very, very long time. In fact, centuries. So, before there was mechanization, before there were factories, people used their home space to run offices, schools, all sorts of things. So, it's not just a recent phenomenon. Certainly, to those who might think that COVID and lockdown invented home working, it absolutely didn't. If you're a salesperson who travels a lot or a management consultant, you probably always work from home. But in terms of the recent past, I think there's, yeah, definitely been some trailblazers and some significant landmarks, amongst which I'd probably count. There was an aerospace company in Germany called MBB. They were widely recognized as actually bringing about some of the first flexible working practices, staggered shifts and staggered lunch breaks and those sort of things to resolve issues that they faced. And then I think you've got to look at the impact of technology as well. Things like the introduction of mainframes with dumb terminals and video conferencing and audio conferencing back in the 70s, 1970s. So, it's not just a modern phenomenon. Technology in particular was enabling home working a long, long time ago. But directly answering your question about who are some of the trailblazers in the contact center space, the one that we both know the best. I'd suggest looking at people like or companies like BT. Back in the 1990s when they introduced their Telework 2000 program, and they had a lot of director inquiries, for example, operating from home. And then you look at the Automobile Association. You look at BPOs like Willow in the 1990s in the States. And I think those are, the real trailblazers. But, it certainly goes back a lot longer than than COVID. And I'll just pull up one stat for you, which is that according to the Office of National Statistics in the UK, 13% of the working population were doing work from home, full or part time. So yeah, it's not something that's new.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that it's interesting that you went sort of so far back in history then talking about that, because I think that the thing that changed the entire world was really the introduction of railways, wasn't it? Because before you could commute to work easily,
Yeah,
you would almost entirely you'd either work at home or you'd work within walking distance from home, and so it was only the ability to sort of travel to work that kind of created this whole idea of living in one place and traveling to somewhere else to actually go to a workplace.
absolutely. And it's difficult for us to envisage what that was like because we're so used to factories and offices. But you know, as I say, home working was around. If you're a spinner or a weaver working in the textile industries in sort of the 17th century, that's what you did. You worked at home. You didn't think anything about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, if we're looking again at recent history, then COVID changed everything because I think that, I think that like a good example is Teleperformance. I remember at the time talking to those guys, and I think they had a few thousand people out of the entire company working from home. And within a couple of months of COVID arriving, it went up to over 400,000 people working from home.
Yeah.
So it's an absolutely enormous change for the BPO CX industry. But did you see? I mean, we all lived through this. It was only 6 years ago. So was it? Were there any kind of common mistakes that you saw? A lot of companies made the same mistake at the same time back at that time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, prior to COVID, there was a lot of companies that talked about home working, and probably very few that did it or did it seriously. But all those companies who thought about it, they were desperate for information come COVID because they didn't have any choice. In the contact center space, you probably had over 90% of contact centers, all of a sudden running work from home teams. But the most common mistake right across the board is definitely just thinking that you can send people home with a laptop and a mobile phone and thinking that's going to be okay. And the most common thing I heard was, yeah, we've got cloud technology. People can work forever, wherever they like. But the one thing I've learned from working with companies in this space for years and years is that it doesn't work like that. Everything is different. The way that you recruit people, the people you recruit, what they're looking for, whether they can actually work from home successfully, the way that you train them, manage them, communicate with them, the tech you use, it's all different. So yeah, that's the most common mistake. And I'll give you one other as well that I think is important, which is I think a lot of people lost sight of the fact that you needed to monitor people. I'm not talking about spying on people, but just monitoring roughly what they did or measuring their output in some way. If you get this wrong and you just send people home and hope that they're going to work and they have a mindset that says, I can get away with this, out of sight, out of mind, you really have only yourself to blame if it goes wrong. So a lot of what we do today is work with companies to make sure that they optimize everything they do in the business to make sure it's going to work for them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and of course, I mean, there was a long, detailed debate about that subject, yeah, a couple of years ago when it turned out that a lot of companies were spying on every single thing that their employees were doing, and I think that there's an argument that yeah, obviously you need to monitor what's going on and you need to measure performance and output, but at the same time, I think people were horrified by the idea that people have got cameras pointing at them all the time. This kind of monitoring.
Yeah, I would just agree with everything you just said. There are certain companies that went out to the marketplace or went out and said, look how clever we are. We got this monitoring software. And of course, the newspaper journalists would just say, there's a company that just spies on its people. And it's a really difficult balancing act because
Mm.
you've got to monitor, everybody's got to monitor. Um, One thing I quite often say to people is that you know, people want to work from home, but it's a different environment. Sometimes there needs to be a compromise. And
Mm.
actually, being monitored more is one of those things. You're out of sight, so you don't have the same sort of support structure around you, and you can't be performance managed in the broadest sense in the same way.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, a bit of sensible monitoring without spying. Spying is
Mhm.
a terrible word, but a lot of monitoring is essential.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the spying is normally how the headline writers describe this whenever anybody launches some new software. Um,
Absolutely.
well, I was going to ask you about, your, I suppose the pitch that you use, like when someone says, why would this be good for my business? What are the sort of top reasons that you give that in the way that work from home or flexible working actually helps a business? And what are the sort of common problems that people have when they try to do this?
This is an area that everybody's got an opinion on. So I always find that the most useful way of answering that particular question is to say, um, not necessarily what I think, even though I've been doing it for a long time, but what is the general consensus? And we do a lot of research and we're probably the only business that's been researching this space since 2016. So we research it every 3 years and we ask hundreds of companies, or we've asked hundreds of companies, these same sort of questions, why do you homework? What do you get out of it? What are the challenges? What are the benefits, etc. So I think in direct response to your question, I would say hundreds of businesses have told us that things like workplace culture overcoming isolation, pastoral care, communication issues, management issues. They're the main challenges that companies face. The main benefit is, I would say, where it works for the business and works for the individual is where people want it, they're happier doing it, and they're more productive. And obviously, in some areas, it's not going to work so well, but where does it work? I would say things like the call center is a great example. And it's no surprise that when we last did a survey, 71% of calls, sorry, our respondents said that 71% of their people worked full or part-time from home. And that is a figure that's going down to 65% in a couple of years. So it's absolutely not going away.
Sorry for jumping into the interview. This is Mark Hillary again. After we'd completed the interview, Michael said to me that he felt this statistic was confusing. What he actually meant to say is that 71% of the people interviewed in the research said that 3/4 or more of their people work full or part-time from home. And that figure is expected to drop to 65% by the end of 2027.
But it works well because in the contact center space and equally in back office space, people doing admin and accounting functions, for example, if you can replicate and what you do in the office well in a work from home environment, and you've got the processes and the procedures to support it, it can work really well. Obviously, where it doesn't work so well is in areas and industry sectors where you can't easily take what you do in the office and replicate it at home. So factories, obviously, businesses that don't have the people to make it work very well. And then there's situations and functions. Probably the best example I can think of is telesales. I've been in several businesses where we've really struggled to get telesales functions working well, working from home, because they thrive on interaction and collaboration and people egging each other on. And you can't replicate that environment where people are individually in their home offices. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think you've got to look at where work from home works best, what sort of people are best suited to it, and be sensible about it. Not make, you know, not assume things, but look at what other people are doing, look what works, and look at the research that's out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if you were, it's interesting that you answered using the research actually, because I think the way that I asked the question, it felt maybe more like asking for your personal view. And I think that that's one of the problems with this debate is that it's easy just to do a Google search and find Forbes or other business magazines running stories that are very positive about work from home and the flexibility it offers. But then you can find just as many stories saying it doesn't work for my business, and then case studies of people talking about it not working. So has this got worse? This kind of polarization that compared to before the pandemic, or is it? I don't know, is it a function of the pandemic, the fact that so many people were forced to use work from home, and we're still sort of seeing a shakeout of people that some are moving stuff back, return to office, and some are continuing to use work from home?
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? It's one of those topics that everybody's got a view on. You can go down the pub and you can have a conversation. If I was a nuclear scientist, I couldn't go down the pub and have a conversation with all my friends about what I do. But things like work from home, everybody's got a view on it, and some
Yeah.
people are very on one side of the debate, and others. It's no surprise really that you have a lot of CEOs that are now drawing up return to the office mandates because they know how to run their business, that they've been doing it for 20 years, and they are adamant that their business looks like this because it's looked like that for 20 years, and they know how to run a business. It's very difficult to, and probably wrong, to tell them any different. Yet we people never had the option of work from home prior to lockdown. They'd never experienced it. Now they have. It's something that's really difficult to take away from people. So I'm not sure it quite answers your question completely, but I think when you end up in a situation where it works for people, I'll give you some examples. People who have small kids, people with parenting responsibilities. You see, a lot of people saying, well, I don't know what I'd do if I was asked to go back to the office full time. People who are living with a disability,
Yeah.
again, people who live too far away from the office. There's certain people who have a very, very strong positive view on it, and other people have a very, very negative view on it. And
Yeah.
I think the answer is look at the stats, look at people's experiences, but don't sort of, have a knee-jerk reaction that everybody needs to go back into the office. I think we've seen enough
Mm.
examples to know that that's not a sensible strategy to just drag people into the office 5 days a week against their will.
Yeah, well, and we've seen. I mean, there's a repeated news story where you can just keep having the same story but changing the name of the company, where the executive insists on a return to the office. We've seen this with Amazon. We've seen it with many of the big banks as well, insisting that people come. And I can understand an argument for that if you're talking about like early career professionals. If you're a graduate, then it's great to go and actually work with your colleagues and learn on the job in person. But clearly, like you were just saying, it's a much more complex. What you need is to structure an environment in which, where it works for people to work from home, they're allowed to do that, and where it works for them to be in the office because they're only 1 year into their career, then they can do that. I mean, is that kind of flexibility likely to become more common then, or are these return to office mandates just going to, keep on getting louder?
2019, 13% of people in the UK work from home full or part time. Um, if you look at the lockdown years, it was probably nearer 70%. I haven't got the exact figure for that. But I know in the States, and they monitor it quite closely, that 2023, 35% of people worked full or part-time from home. It's now about 25%.
Mm-hmm.
But the numbers are going down. But, anybody who says, well, everybody's going back to the office, that's it. That's not enough of a story because actually what's happening is that we're plateauing at 25%. So if you've got 25% of people who are working at home 1, 2, 3 days a week, you need a strategy for that. So yeah, it's less than it was. But anybody who says, oh, everybody's going back to the office, 5 days a week, you're going to get a heck of a kickback and you're ignoring the numbers. So no, I don't think it's the future. I think the future is people realizing that we're in a new world of work, forgetting about this debate about whether it's going away or not, because it isn't going away, and actually getting on with the reality of managing your business in this new world of work. I think that's what the
Mm-hmm.
challenge is.
Yeah. So okay. So then, if we take that as read, that the future for most professional environments will be some sort of hybrid, where you can work from home, but you can also work from an office. How do you, as an executive, sort of plan a way forward that can manage that? I mean, what if you were sitting and building an action plan to embrace this and get this flexibility to work? Then what would the key steps be?
I think you need to take a view of the broadest hybrid working plan that you can. So you need to look at everything, not just how many days a week people work in the office. You need to look at separately, you need to look at recruitment, management, comms, training, technology, compliance, etc. You need to look at all those areas and need to say, how can I optimize all those things? And it's great, every big company has a an HR team. The problem is with a lot of the people in those HR teams is they haven't been through this before. They haven't ever been asked to handle a return to the office mandate or create a hybrid working strategy. And I think that's the big problem. So what my advice to these people be, it would be to speak to people who've been there and done it before. And there are people who have run these teams for 10 years. They don't all do it the same way, but getting together and actually brainstorming and asking that question of a group of people: have you confronted this situation? What have you done about it? Has it worked? Is a great way forward. Otherwise, it's individual trial and error.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, because I was just thinking as you were saying that, my co-host Peter Ryan has his CXO conference. The next one's coming up in Canada pretty soon, actually. But that is essentially, that's BPOs getting together, sitting there, sharing problems, talking about the industry, and it's peers working together to try and make their entire industry work better. So is there something similar to that for the subject of flexible work and work from home?
Well, I started up a forum in 20 as long ago as 2015, and we used this forum as a way of focusing the research that we did, but also we held meetings and got people to sit around a table and share experiences. People who've done it for a long time, people who've never done it, and that was really, really useful. So 2026, we're relaunching that initiative through Spacial, and we're being supported by a major UK trade association. And we hope that the time is right, that people have now accepted hybrid as a thing. It's not going away, and they're working on their hybrid plans on how to optimize it. So we hope, we've received a lot of support already, but we hope that is pretty much what the market needs to push forward hybrid working at the moment.
Okay.
So fingers crossed.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was going to just say as a wrap up, what have you got planned for the rest of the year then? But I guess you've partially answered that by saying that you're relaunching this forum. But is anything else going on in the near future?
Well, we did a number of hybrid health checks last year, and those worked very well. We were able to send our consultants into companies and say, what are you doing? How are you finding it? We interviewed managers, we interviewed team leaders from all throughout an organization, and we asked employees to fill in anonymous surveys. So we had the view from the company, the view from the individual, and we put it together and we assessed where people were against what we considered to be best practice. And to be honest, more of those. I think the time again is right for that sort of approach where, it's along the same themes of people learning from the collective experience of others.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Michael, very much. There's a great insight, and definitely it sounds like the future is definitely flexible.
I certainly hope so.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.